The Strait of Hormuz, March 23rd, 2026. A United States submarine just sank an Iranian warship with a torpedo. The first time an American sub has killed a surface combatant since World War II. 80 years of underwater peace, broken in 14 seconds. Right now, 21 miles of salt water separate Iran from Oman. That's it. 21 miles. And inside that gap, traffic is down 90%. The IRGC has issued a blanket warning: no vessel is safe. Oil tankers that carried 20% of the world's crude are anchored. Still. Engines cold. Crews waiting. The Iranian frigate Bushehr sits on the seafloor in 80 meters of water. Its crew never heard the torpedo. The Mk-48 travels at 55 knots. At that speed, the ocean doesn't warn you. It delivers you. Think about what just happened. The last time an American submarine torpedoed a ship, Roosevelt was president. That's how long this peace lasted. And it's over. Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th. In less than a month, the most important shipping lane on Earth has become a kill zone. Oil futures spiked 40% overnight. Shipping insurance rates for Gulf-bound tankers tripled in a week. Every gas station on the planet felt it within 72 hours. But here's what nobody is telling you. This isn't a new crisis. This is a 400-year-old heist. The Strait of Hormuz has been fought over, betrayed for, and held hostage since before the United States existed. And the playbook being used right now, in 2026, was written in 1622 by a British corporation that made the East India Company the most powerful business in history. Most people think this started with Iran. It didn't. It started with a Portuguese fortress, a British betrayal, and a 50,000-man Persian army. So I'm going to show you three things. First, the physics of why this 21-mile choke point is the deadliest water on Earth, using 3D anatomy to show you what a naval mine does to a ship and to a human body. Second, the forgotten 1622 siege, where the British East India Company committed the betrayal that invented modern choke point warfare. And third, why the exact same strategy from 1622 is being repeated right now in 2026 with nuclear stakes. How did a 400-year-old double-cross create the world's most dangerous bottleneck? And what happens to the global economy if this strait stays closed? Before we rewind 400 years, you need to understand something. You need to understand why this narrow strip of water is so uniquely terrifying. Because the Strait of Hormuz isn't just narrow, it's shallow. The strait is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, between Point Reshis and Oman. But the actual shipping lanes, the traffic separation scheme, are only 2 miles wide in each direction. And in some places, the water is barely 60 meters deep. That combination, narrow and shallow, turns one of the oldest weapons in naval history into something close to perfect. The sea mine. And here's the thing most people miss. You don't need a submarine to shut down Hormuz. You don't need missiles. You need a fishing boat and a few hundred metal spheres from 1914. This is a contact mine, The design is over a century old. Those lead spikes sticking out of the shell are called Hertz horns. There are usually 5 to 7 per mine. Each one is hollow. Inside each horn, a glass vial filled with sulfuric acid. That's it. Glass and acid. When a ship's hull bends the horn, the glass vial shatters. Sulfuric acid floods into a lead-acid battery built into the mine's casing. The circuit closes, the detonator fires. From contact to detonation, less than 1 second. The charge is typically 200 to 300 kilograms of TNT. And in water, an explosion doesn't behave the way you think it does. This physics, this 110-year-old physics, is what Iran has stockpiled. Estimates range from 3,000 to 6,000 mines in IRGC arsenals, enough to seed the entire navigable channel in a single night. When a mine detonates beneath a ship, it doesn't just explode. It creates a gas bubble. And what this bubble does is one of the most violent sequences in all of physics. Phase 1. The detonation produces a sphere of superheated gas that expands outward at 1,500 meters per second. The shockwave hits the ship's hull. The entire vessel lifts. Thousands of tons of steel pushed upward like a bathtub toy. Phase 2. And this is the part that kills the ship. The gas bubble is unstable. It collapses. When it collapses, it creates a low-pressure void directly beneath the hull. A hole in the water. The ship's keel, its spine, is now suspended over nothing. The bow is in water. The stern is in water. The middle is over a void. Gravity does the rest. The keel snaps. The ship's back breaks. And the entire vessel folds like a book closing. Naval engineers call this a keel breaker. The correct physics term for the bubble is a Rayleigh-Plesset collapse. The practical term is one mine, one ship, one kill. Stop and think about this. The weapon designed in 1907 can snap a modern cargo ship in half using nothing but a gas bubble and gravity. That's what's sitting in the strait right now. Now let's go inside the ship, inside the body. Because what a mine does to a hull is straightforward. What it does to a human being is something else. The shock wave from the detonation passes through the hull and into the air inside the compartment. It travels at roughly 340 meters per second through air. When it hits the crew member's chest wall, it passes through solid tissue without much resistance. Muscle, bone, organs, those are dense. The wave moves through them. But then it hits the lungs. And the lungs are different. Lungs are air. Tiny sacs called alveoli, each one thinner than a human hair. The shock wave hits the boundary between solid tissue and air, the gas-tissue interface, and the physics change completely. The air inside the alveoli compresses faster than the tissue around it can absorb. The sacs implode. Blood vessels rupture at the microscopic level. The lungs fill with blood. Doctors call it blast lung, pulmonary hemorrhage from primary blast injury. The sailor can be standing 30 meters from the blast point, completely uninjured on the outside, and drowning in their own blood on the inside. The shock wave is transmitted through the deck plating into the sailor's feet and body, structure-borne shock, which is how that energy reaches them so efficiently. No shrapnel wounds, no burns, no external injuries. just a person standing upright, whose lungs have turned into sponges filled with blood. And they have roughly 4 minutes before oxygen deprivation becomes irreversible. This is why the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a shipping lane. It's a kill box, designed by geography and perfected by a century of weapons engineering. And in 2026, that kill box is active. But the question isn't how the strait kills. The question is who gets to own the killing. Because that question has been asked before. 404 years ago, and the answer involved the greatest betrayal in the history of global trade. 1507, the Indian Ocean. A Portuguese admiral named Afonso de Albuquerque sails into the Strait of Hormuz with a fleet of warships and a simple proposition for the Kingdom of Hormuz: pay tribute or burn. And here's what you need to understand about Hormuz in 1507. It wasn't some backwater fishing island. The Kingdom of Hormuz was one of the richest cities on Earth. An island barely 12 kilometers across, sitting at the mouth of the Persian Gulf like a toll booth on the world's busiest highway. Spices from India, silk from China, horses from Arabia, pearls from Bahrain. Everything flowed through Hormuz. European travelers who visited the island described it as the Sodom and Gomorrah of the East. Markets overflowing with cinnamon, saffron, and opium. Merchants from 70 nations crowding into a bazaar where you could buy anything from a diamond to a slave. The annual revenue of the Kingdom of Hormuz was estimated at 200,000 gold ducats. In today's money, that's roughly $50 million a year. From a single island. Most islands that size have a fishing village. This one had an empire. Albuquerque saw that wealth and understood something fundamental. You don't need to conquer the trade. You just need to conquer the bottleneck. So the Portuguese seized Hormuz. They built a fortress on the island, walls 40 feet thick, cannon batteries facing every approach. And then they invented something that would define this strait for the next century. The Cartaza. A safe passage document. Every single ship entering or leaving the Persian Gulf was required to purchase a Cartaza from the Portuguese. No exceptions. Arab merchants, Indian traders, Chinese junks, Persian dhows. If your ship didn't carry a Portuguese-stamped Cartaza, you were a pirate. And pirates got sunk. The fees were steep, roughly 5 to 8% of your cargo's value. And the Portuguese didn't just collect, they enforced. Patrol fleets cruised the strait year-round. Ships without Cartazas were boarded, their cargo seized, their crews imprisoned or killed. It was, in every meaningful sense, a protection racket. Pay us, and your ship sails. Don't pay, and your ship burns. And it worked. For over 100 years, the Portuguese held the Strait of Hormuz. They collected their tax on every barrel of spice, every bale of silk, every chest of pearls moving between Asia and Europe. The fortress on Hormuz Island was considered impenetrable. No Asian power had the naval cannons to breach its walls. No European power was willing to challenge Portugal's claim. For 100 years, this system held. 100 years of unchallenged profit from a single choke point. And then, in 1622, it all collapses. Not because of an invasion, because of a handshake. If you're hooked on this story, do me a favor and subscribe, because what the British did next is one of the dirtiest moves in the history of international trade. And it's about to happen. 1617. The English East India Company is losing. Badly. They've been trying to break into the Indian Ocean spice trade for 17 years, and the Portuguese keep shutting them out. Every time an English merchant ship tries to sail through the Gulf, the Portuguese demand a cartaza, pay the tax, or get sunk. And here's the thing about the East India Company in 1617. They're not a government. They're a corporation. A joint stock company with shareholders in London who expect returns. And the returns are terrible, because the Portuguese own the toll road. So the company makes a decision. If they can't beat the Portuguese at sea, they'll find someone who can help them on land. And there's one power in the region who hates the Portuguese even more than the English do. What happens next is technically an act of war. The English and Portugal are at peace in Europe. Their kings have treaties, ambassadors dine together. And 6,000 miles away, the East India Company is about to secretly ally with Portugal's sworn enemy, the Persian Safavid Empire. Shah Abbas the Great, the most powerful ruler in the Middle East. He's been trying to reclaim the Strait of Hormuz for decades. The problem: the Persians have a massive army, 50,000 men ready to fight, but almost no navy. They can't crack the Portuguese fortress from the sea. The walls are too thick, the cannons too heavy. The English have the opposite problem. They have ships. They have naval cannons. What they don't have is an army. The Persians had 50,000 soldiers and no cannons. The English had cannons and no soldiers. Separately, they'd been losing for decades. Together, they could end a century of Portuguese control in a single siege. In 1621, the deal is struck. A secret alliance between the English East India Company and Shah Abbas. The terms are simple. The English provide the naval firepower, warships, heavy cannons, and sailors to blockade the strait from the sea. The Persians provide the army, 50,000 troops to assault the Portuguese fortress from the land side. If they win, the two parties split the loot. Half the customs revenue from Hormuz goes to England, half to Persia. There's just one problem. England and Portugal are at peace. The English crown has not authorized this war. If this alliance becomes public, it's an international scandal. So the East India Company does what corporations have always done when the law gets inconvenient. They pretend it's not happening. The company's directors in London issue deliberately vague orders to their commanders in the Gulf. No direct mention of war. No paper trail connecting London to the siege. Plausible deniability. Invented 400 years before the CIA gave it a name. January 1622. The assault begins. 4 English warships, led by a captain named Thomas Blythe, sail into the strait and form a blockade around Hormuz Island. Their cannons face the Portuguese fortress. From the land side, the Persian army crosses to the island. 50,000 men swarming onto a piece of rock barely 12 kilometers across. The Portuguese garrison is outnumbered roughly 30-1. But they have the fortress. Walls 40 feet thick. Gunpowder magazines stocked for a year-long siege. Cannon placements covering every beach. The Portuguese commander, Simão de Melo, sends an urgent message to Goa, the Portuguese capital in India. Send reinforcements. The fleet will arrive in weeks, maybe months. He needs to hold until then. The siege lasts 10 weeks. 10 weeks of English cannonballs cracking the fortress walls from the sea. 10 weeks of Persian sappers digging tunnels beneath the foundations. 10 weeks of gunpowder smoke so thick that lookouts on the towers can't see the beach 200 meters below them. The walls hold for 6 weeks. Then the English shift tactics. They stop targeting the walls and start targeting the water cisterns. Hormuz is a desert island, no freshwater sources. Every drop the garrison drinks comes from cisterns inside the fortress. The English gunners find their range. One by one, the cisterns crack. Water pours into the sand. By week 8, the Portuguese are drinking seawater strained through cloth. Dysentery spreads through the garrison. Men too weak to stand are propped against the walls to hold muskets. April 23, 1622. The fortress falls. The Persian army breaches the eastern wall through a tunnel and pours into the courtyard. The fighting lasts less than a day. The Portuguese garrison, dehydrated, diseased, and outnumbered, surrenders. The loot is staggering. The Portuguese treasury on Hormuz contains an estimated 2 million cruzados in gold, silver, and trade goods, enough to fund the East India Company's operations for years. Think about what just happened. A private British corporation acting without the permission of its own government secretly allied with a foreign empire to destroy a European ally's fortress. And they did it for money. Not for freedom, not for justice, for a share of the toll booth. 1622. The British replaced the Portuguese tax with their own. And here's the question for 2026. If the United States and its allies succeed in reopening the strait, who collects the new tax? Who decides which ships sail and which ships don't? Because history says there is no such thing as freedom of navigation. There is only the question of who holds the toll booth. Is this liberation or replacement? Is Operation Epic Fury a defense of the global economy or a hostile takeover of the world's most valuable choke point? And what happens if Iran decides that losing the strait means losing everything? And that's where 2026 departs from 1622. Because in 1622, the worst-case scenario was a siege. In 2026, the worst-case scenario is something the Portuguese never imagined. Iran's nuclear program has been the subtext of every Gulf crisis since 2003. The Strait is Iran's leverage. It's the one card they can always play. Close the strait, and the world bleeds 20% of its oil supply overnight. Every factory in Asia slows. Every gas price in Europe spikes. Every government that depends on Gulf crude faces a domestic crisis. And Iran knows this. They've known it since 1622, when they watched the British demonstrate that whoever controls the strait controls the global economy. The only difference is that in 2026, the stakes aren't gold ducats and cinnamon. They're barrels of crude and uranium centrifuges. Right now, as you watch this, 14 oil tankers are anchored at Al Fujairah on the Omani side of the strait. Their engines are off. Their crews are idle. Each tanker carries roughly 2 million barrels of crude. That's 28 million barrels sitting still. At current prices, that's approximately $2.4 billion in oil that isn't moving. In 1507, the Portuguese built a fortress and called it security. In 1622, the British destroyed that fortress and called it liberation. Then they built their own toll booth on the ruins. In 1980, Iraq and Iran turned the strait into a shooting gallery during the tanker war, and the United States sent the Navy to keep the oil flowing and called it freedom of navigation. Every generation tells itself a different story about the Strait of Hormuz. Freedom, security, free trade. But the geography doesn't change. 21 miles wide, 2 shipping lanes, 60 meters deep. And every generation reaches the same conclusion. Whoever holds this water holds the world's wallet. In March 2026, the wallet is being held at gunpoint. The question is whether the gun changes hands. It always has before. The most dangerous place on Earth isn't a battlefield. It's a bottleneck. Because battlefields have winners. Bottlenecks only have owners. As of this recording, Operation Epic Fury is ongoing. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed to commercial traffic. Oil prices have not stabilized. The sinking of the Boucher on March 23rd has escalated calls for a ceasefire from the EU, China, and India. No ceasefire has been reached. The Portuguese fortress on Hormuz Island still stands today, a ruin visited by tourists who rarely know the story of what happened inside its walls. The 1622 siege ended Portuguese control of the Indian Ocean. But Portugal's loss triggered a chain reaction that reshaped global trade for centuries, starting with a war so bizarre it's been almost completely forgotten. The 1623 Amboina massacre, where the Dutch tortured and executed English merchants in Indonesia, setting off a rivalry that created the modern financial system. If you like more videos like this where we explore current events throughout the context of history, please subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it helps more than you will ever think. Thank you.